This is CNN Breaking News.
Vladimir Putin, from Russia's KGB to a long presidency defined by war in Ukraine. Vladimir Putin has been in power since 2000, longer than any Kremlin leader since Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin, as he prepares for a fifth term as president, age 71. All semblance of opposition is gone and there is little to stop him staying on, if he wants, until 2036, and yet, it was almost by accident that this little-known former KGB man was handpicked for the Kremlin. A case of being in the right place at the right time in predecessor Boris Yeltsin's inner circle. Vladimir Putin was a street-fighting boy whose early years were spent in a communal flat, or kommunalka, in communist Leningrad, although he appeared to embrace liberal, democratic Russia. He later described the chaotic collapse of the Soviet Union as the biggest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. Determined to prevent Ukraine from leaving Russia's orbit, he unleashed Europe's biggest war since World War II. With a full-scale invasion on the 24th of February 2022, Putin's distorted view of history. He often justifies his actions with an outlandish perception of history and a keen resentment of NATO. Before the invasion, and since, he falsely claimed that Ukraine was an artificial state populated by neo-Nazis, and he sought to stop Ukraine getting closer to NATO. The Western leader who arguably knew him best was Germany's former Chancellor Angela Merkel, who was once reputed to have described him as out of touch with reality and in another world. She repeatedly tried to negotiate with Vladimir Putin, but after he sent troops to invade Kyiv, she came to the conclusion he wants to destroy Europe. Rosenberg, Russia's stage-managed election, occupied Ukraine forced to vote in Putin's election. Vladimir Putin was born 7 years after the end of World War II, following the siege of Leningrad, which killed his elder brother and which his parents barely survived. He had a tough childhood that would affect the rest of his life. You have to throw the first punch. In an interview in 2000, he remembered cornering a large rat on the staircase of his communal apartment block. It had nowhere to run. Putin described the rat lashing out and throwing itself at him. There, on the landing, I got a quick and lasting lesson in the meaning of the word cornered. The young Putin got into fights with local boys who were often bigger and stronger. Later, he would look back on that time and describe himself as a hooligan. He took up judo, which he continued as a black belt during his presidency, and the Russian martial art of Sambo, and stayed close to his childhood partners, Arkady and Boris Rotenberg. In 2015, he reflected on his early experiences on the streets of what is now St. Petersburg. 50 years ago, the Leningrad street taught me a rule: if a fight is inevitable, you have to throw the first punch. After studying at Leningrad State University, in 1975 he went straight into the Soviet intelligence service, the KGB. It was a natural step for a law graduate, and it suited him perfectly. It was also a dream job for a young man brought up on Soviet TV shows such as The Sword and The Shield, which recounted the daring do of an undercover Russian spy in Nazi Germany. I was a pure and utterly successful product of Soviet patriotic education, he reflected. By now, he spoke good German and he was posted to the East German city of Dresden in 1985, where he saw firsthand the collapse of a communist state in 1989. Vladimir Putin's formative German years, from the KGB headquarters across the road. He watched as crowds stormed the headquarters of the East German secret police, the Stasi. When a small group approached his building, he warned them off. But when he called a Red Army tank unit for protection, he realized Russia was of no help. We cannot do anything without orders from Moscow. And Moscow is silent. The next year, he returned to a political system in free fall. He was given the rank of lieutenant colonel, but never excelled at the KGB. One of his superiors, Nikolai Leonov, considered him a mediocre agent. War in Ukraine. Putin's war in Ukraine started, not in February 2022, but with the seizure of Ukraine's Crimean Peninsula in 2014. Putin reveals secret Crimea plot. The night that Ukraine's pro-Moscow leader fled violent protests in Kyiv and was effectively ousted, The Russian president said he held an all-night meeting and told his colleagues it was time to bring Crimea back into Russia. Pro-Russian agitators then seized swathes of Ukraine's Donbas region and what took hold in the east for 8 years until Putin decided he would invade from the north, south and east in a bid to overthrow Ukraine's elected government and seize Kyiv. With the invasion in 2022, he has repeatedly sought to justify the war. He writes long historical essays, gives speeches and lectures the few foreign visitors that come. But it is a distorted, selective history that brooks no dissent. Civil rights group Memorial, which has devoted decades to remembering the victims of Soviet repression, has been banned. Its veteran co-president Oleg Orlov was jailed for this description of the Putin era. They wanted fascism, and they got it.